Dad chose my stepbrother's wedding over mine, so my grandpa walked me down the aisle and I inherited his lake house. I, 28F, am in dire need of guidance regarding my wedding circumstances. Family drama has made what could have been a great situation into a total nightmare. I'll start from the beginning to help you understand how we got here, because there's a lot to unpack. I grew up in what I believe to be a happy family. As an only child, weekend excursions with my parents, family game evenings, and my dad teaching me how to ride a bike are all part of my early recollections. The type of father who would construct tree houses for me and ward off monsters beneath my bed, he was my hero. But when I was 14, everything changed. The day my parents sat me down and announced their impending divorce is still fresh in my mind. Mom had discovered that Dad was having an affair with his coworker Lara, 42F. Dad and Lara were married 6 months after the divorce was finalized. At that point, I got to know Aaron, 25M. Lara's son from a prior marriage. The change wasn't simple. Suddenly, I had a stepbrother after being an only child. My dad took it upon himself to be Aaron's ideal father figure when his biological father abandoned him when he was a little child. I initially found it admirable that Dad was assisting a child in need of a father. I was unaware that this would ultimately result in the death of my own father. Although slow, the alterations persisted. Aaron's baseball schedule became the focal point of our Sunday father-daughter breakfasts, which evolved into family breakfasts. My dad used to attend all of my dance recitals, but he started missing them because Aaron had practices or games. Despite having no baseball knowledge, he even joined Aaron's squad as assistant coach. My mother remarried David, a good man who had a job offer in another state when I was 16. Despite everything, I wanted to be near my dad. So I chose to stay when they asked if I wanted to relocate with them. In retrospect, I wish I had chosen differently. My final year of college was the true turning moment. One rainy night, I was hit by another automobile that ran a red light while I was traveling home. Due to intestinal bleeding, I needed emergency surgery. David and Mom flew in right away. But my dad, he texted me to let me know that Aaron was having a breakdown over his girlfriend ending their relationship, so he couldn't go. I was in the hospital for 3 days, and he never once came up. I concentrated on creating my own life. After graduation, at work, I met Mike, 30M, the new IT manager, and we became friends because we both enjoy hiking and classic sci-fi films. He proposed to us on a sunrise hike to our favorite location after 3 years of dating. It was ideal, and I felt as though my life was finally coming together. For the first time. We sent out invitations 6 months in advance and decided to get married on October 15th of this year. I debated whether or not to ask Dad to escort me down the aisle for weeks. He was still my father. In spite of everything, and I secretly hoped that this would be our opportunity to mend our relationship. A month prior to the wedding, I made the decision to hold off and surprise him with the request. However, Dad called me to lunch before I could ask him. He avoided making eye contact and appeared anxious. At last, he revealed the shocking news. Dad had already agreed to be Aaron's best man, and Aaron was getting married on October 15th. I had the impression that I had been punched in the stomach. I asked Aaron why he picked the same day, and he told me it was the day he and his fiancée initially met 2 years prior. I mentioned that Aaron was aware of our date, and that we had sent out our invitations months prior. Dad's reaction? Since my venue was more flexible, while Aaron's was extremely exclusive, he recommended that I change my date. I wouldn't alter our date. Deposits had already been made, invitations had been sent, and relatives were traveling in from abroad. Dad accused me of being self-centered and disregarding Aaron's sentiments. When I attempted to explain this, he claimed that because Aaron never had a real father figure, he needed him more. When my grandfather, Mom's father, learned the situation, it blew out. He and I have always been close, particularly since my parents' divorce. He offered to take me down the aisle right away since he was upset with my dad. Then Dad made an unexpected announcement. He said he would give his vacation home to Mike and me as a wedding present. It is a stunning waterfront property that we have always appreciated. Dad abruptly changed his mind. He contacted me and said he could make both weddings work, showing up at my reception to dance with me after serving as Aaron's best man at the ceremony. He began accusing me of destroying the family and forcing him to make a decision. When I didn't agree right away, Karma, however, had other ideas. It seems that Aaron did not ask Dad to his wedding 2 weeks prior. Aaron wanted his biological father to be his best man instead. According to Dad, who called me in tears, assuming he could just lead me down the aisle as if nothing had happened. Dad was now free to take part in every aspect of my wedding. No, I told him. Given his extraordinary generosity, I didn't want to upset my grandfather by denying him this moment because he had stepped up when Dad stepped out. Dad went totally crazy. He began shouting that I was being deceived by my grandfather, that I was selling my loyalty for a house, and that I was putting money before family. I blocked his number after hanging up on him. His whole family is now accusing me of being materialistic and callous. Dad is hurting. Therefore my stepmother Lara says I should be more compassionate since he's now available. Even some of my friends believe I'm being too harsh and that I should give him another try. However, I don't believe I'm mistaken. This goes beyond the wedding. It's about years of being viewed as Aaron's second best friend and having my needs and feelings ignored in favor of Aaron. Since he's only coming to me since his first choice didn't work out. Why should I give him this unique moment? So, Reddit, even if my dad is now available, am I wrong for not letting him lead me down the aisle by picking my grandfather, who gave us a house, over my father? Am I being materialistic? I'd greatly benefit from an independent viewpoint on this. Update 1. I want to start by saying thank you to everyone for their encouraging words and remarks. I feel more sure now about my choice, thanks to all of you. However, since my previous post, a lot has transpired. And I must tell you about the mayhem that occurred during my wedding rehearsal yesterday. The rehearsal was set to begin at our location at 5 p.m. It was going well. The ladies were practicing their steps. Mike's nephew was performing admirably as our ring bearer, and my granddad was rehearsing leading me down the aisle. Then my father unexpectedly arrived. We didn't notice him at first. He crept into the rear of the venue and observed from the sidelines. He didn't start yelling until we were in the middle of the second practice. Yelling that this was all wrong and that he was my real father, who had a greater right to be there than my grandfather. He rushed down the aisle and shoved past my bridesmaids. Bless him. My grandfather made an effort to remain composed protectively. He moved in front of me and beckoned Dad away. Dad became even more irate as a result. He began bringing up old family history, saying that my grandfather had never liked him and that the house offer had turned me against him. He even claimed that my grandfather was attempting to purchase his way into the position of father of the cry. The worst thing? Dad could not stand up straight, and his sentences were slurred. So it was obvious he had been drinking before. Venue security arrived. Dad attempted to physically shove my grandfather away from me after Mike phoned them. Fortunately, Mike's brother intervened and restrained him. The entire event was terrifying. My mom was taping everything in case we needed proof for a restraining order. My bridesmaids were stunned, and my flower girls were crying. Dad started yelling at me as security escorted him out, saying that I was dead to him and that I would regret putting money before blood. It was simultaneously heartbreaking and humiliating. However, this is when things took a surprising turn. My stepmother Lara had slipped in behind Dad. In all the confusion, she drew me aside after he left and asked if we could speak in private. I was completely stunned by what she disclosed. Lara believes that Aaron had purposefully orchestrated this entire wedding date catastrophe. She handed me screenshots of 3 months' worth of chats between Aaron and his fiancée. Although they had talked about a number of potential wedding dates, Aaron insisted on October 15th since it was my date. He boasted in his texts that he was going to show Dad that he loved him more than I did. The really terrible thing, though, my father was aware of this. Aaron freely shared his idea with Dad in texts that Lara showed me. Dad had replied that he understood Aaron's feelings and would back Aaron's decision rather than shutting it down. Knowing that I would have to reschedule my date or risk losing Aaron as a part of my ceremony, Dad even assisted Aaron in booking the location, as she showed me all of this. Lara was in tears. She claimed to have witnessed Dad's favoritism of Aaron for years, but she always justified it by telling herself that Aaron needed more help because his biological father wasn't there. But after witnessing Dad's handling of this matter, she realized how poisonous things had gotten. The family dynamic I observed was only the beginning. She disclosed it seems that Dad has been snooping around and turning down invites to family gatherings where I would be expected, claiming that I was too busy or that I didn't want to attend. He has been giving Aaron details about my life and pushing him to match my accomplishments. In fact, when I got engaged, Dad advised Aaron to pop the question to his fiancée very far away in order to avoid falling behind. Lara expressed her sincere regret for not speaking up sooner. She claimed that she is divorcing her father because she can no longer put up with his actions, particularly after witnessing him attempt to physically threaten my grandfather at the rehearsal. She has come to the realization that Dad is actively supporting Aaron's efforts to exclude me from the family, not merely playing favorites. Despite all of this drama, I'm more sure than ever of my choice, and the wedding is tomorrow. We've hired additional security to make sure Dad can't enter the venue. And my grandfather will lead me down the aisle. I declined Mike's suggestion that we postpone if I needed more time to take it all in. I refused to let our beautiful day be ruined by Dad and Aaron's games. Some of Dad's family members continue to support him, saying that families should be together, and that I'm exaggerating. I'm done feeling bad though. After seeing those texts and seeing Dad's inebriated outbursts, this is about years of emotional abuse and manipulation that I'm finally seeing clearly. It's not about the house, the money, or even who will accompany me down the aisle anymore. I just want to concentrate on my wedding for the time being. But Lara stated she would testify if I wanted a restraining order. My grandfather, mom, stepdad, and my wonderful fiancé are all on my side. Perhaps it is all the family I require. If something noteworthy occurs after the wedding, I'll provide another update. Before the big day, I need to try to get some sleep right now. Again, I want to thank everyone for their support. You have no idea how much it means. Update 2. This is more twisted than I could have imagined, but here we are. Any reservations I had about removing my dad from my life have been totally dispelled by what I'm going to reveal. My grandfather escorted me down the aisle. Mike's vows brought everyone to tears of joy, and the additional security made sure there were no unwelcome disruptions. Everything about my wedding went flawlessly. Even our first married holiday was spent at my grandfather's lake house, which is now our official residence. However, I received a call from my cousin Amy yesterday. As Lara's niece, she went to Aaron's wedding, and what she told me completely upended everything. Do you recall how Dad said Aaron declined his invitation and went with his biological father? It was an outright falsehood. Amy claims that Aaron never asked Dad not to come. In reality, it was far more deliberate. 3 months before the wedding, Aaron's biological father, who had been gone all of his life, unexpectedly made a reappearance. We're talking about an $80,000 celebration at a prestigious vineyard, and he felt bad for leaving Aaron. As a way to make things right, he volunteered to cover the entire wedding. Dad felt intimidated when Aaron's biological father offered to cover half of Aaron's wedding expenses, which came to almost $40,000. It drove him insane that he couldn't match that degree of generosity. Dad viewed Aaron's reconnection with his biological father as competition rather than a positive development. The actual kicker? Dad decided not to attend the wedding himself. He informed Aaron that if the biological father was covering all of the costs, he would not go. In fact, he attempted to force Aaron to choose between having Dad serve as his best man and having his ideal wedding paid for. Dad yelled at Aaron when he decided to have the wedding paid for, of course. However, he made up the excuse about not being invited rather than telling me this. He believed that by playing the victim, he would win my sympathy and be able to lead me down the aisle. He was attempting to get into mine by using Aaron's wedding as leverage. Things worsened. Videos from Aaron's wedding reception that Amy showed me showed Dad watching from the parking lot in the background. He watched the celebration through the windows of the venue for hours while he sat in his car. No one wanted to cause a commotion by alerting security, but a few attendees observed and felt uneasy. What Dad has been telling everyone about my grandfather's gift is the most annoying thing. He is circulating allegations among the family that I looked around for a partner and offered my grandfather's house to the person who showed the greatest interest in me. He's telling people that I deceived my grandfather into giving up his land and that he's getting old. On social media, some family members have started making crude remarks about our wedding pictures. Since they even think he's real. A relative wrote, "It's sad how some people trade family loyalty for material gain. I hope the house was worth losing your father over," said another uncle. I drove to Dad's house because I was so furious and wanted to tell him everything I knew. A bad concept. Rather than offering an apology, or even acknowledging it, he attempted to defend his behavior. He said that by inventing the tale of Aaron not inviting him, he was testing my loyalty. He said that regardless of the house gift, I would have demanded that he escort me down the aisle if I truly loved him then. Because Aaron is also related. He had the gall to insist that Aaron receive a portion of my grandfather's present because it's not fair that Aaron receives nothing and I receive such a great present. He genuinely proposed that we sell the lake house and divide the proceeds. He threatened to challenge the property transfer in court. When I declined, I was both relieved and appalled. When I left his place, I just know that I made the proper choice. Every time I learned something new after that, Lara called me and told me that ever since my grandfather made the gift announcement, Dad has been obsessed with the lake house. He and Aaron apparently thought I would allow them to use it for weekend fishing excursions since we were a family. Because of Dad's disparaging remarks about my grandfather and me, I've made the decision to have my attorney write him a cease and desist letter in order to defend himself against Dad's untrue statements on his mental health. My grandfather is also investigating his legal alternatives. Aaron has been tweeting passive-aggressively about fake family members and gold diggers on social media. But he hasn't spoken to me directly. He and anyone who backs his and Dad's story have been blocked by me. I'm concentrating on getting settled in our new house with Mike and attempting to put all of this turmoil behind us right now, but I'll give you another update if anything important occurs. Update 3. I have finally found a solution that makes me feel at peace, so this will be my last update. I've decided to stop communicating with my dad and his side of the family entirely in light of the turmoil and disclosures of the last few months. It has been a wild ride for the last 3 months. As I indicated in my previous post, Dad did attempt to challenge the transfer of the lake house. He launched a lawsuit arguing that he ought to have some influence on my grandfather's property choices because he is my father. After my grandfather produced copious records attesting to his mental capacity and his explicit desire to transfer the land to Mike and me, his attorney finally abandoned the case when Dad lost the court battle. His response was explosive when he arrived at my place of employment. He created such a commotion that my employer had to bar him from the building. He yelled that I had stolen his retirement dream, implying that he and Aaron had intended to use the lake house as a fishing hideaway. Our restraining order documentation now includes the security footage of his outburst. Even more information about Dad's actions over the years was made public during Lara's divorce procedures. She discovered emails in which he and Aaron would purposefully schedule family get-togethers to clash with my crucial dates. They would purposefully plan events for when they knew I had obligations, then use my absence to portray me as the heartless relative. Spreadsheets were actually used to keep track of my schedule in order to generate these conflicts. The most startling revelation was found in Lara's divorce documents. It turns out that Dad had been putting money aside in a different account for years, money that was meant to be for Aaron and me. But according to the account statements, every cent was used on Aaron's schooling, vehicle, and now his wedding. Prior to Dad leaving, when Lara questioned this, Dad said my mom and grandfather could support me, so I didn't need the money. Aaron is also not managing the situation properly. It appears that his biological father's involvement backfired since, following the wedding, he stopped answering Aaron's calls. Aaron has been attempting to get back in touch with his father, but he is too busy with the divorce and litigation to give him any attention. Aaron has been going on lengthy social media tirades about how I destroyed his family by stealing his future lake house and turning Lara against Dad. Through all of this, my grandfather, may he be blessed, has been a tremendous source of support. It has been touching to watch him and Mike connect over home renovation tasks as they work on remodeling portions of the lake house. This year, my mom, stepdad, grandfather, and a few close friends who supported us will be the only ones attending our first Christmas celebration there. Lara contacted me last week to inform me that following the completion of the divorce, she would be relocating to a different state. She thanked me for giving her the confidence to go and apologized once more for not realizing Dad's manipulation sooner. Even though we're not close, I admire her for finally confronting Dad's actions. The extended family is mainly divided into two groups, those who have seen through Dad's lies and those who still believe them. It seems quite liberating to have lost contact with some relatives. They are the only family I need, and the people that matter have stayed. I'm getting used to living in a lake house with Mike. I occasionally catch myself feeling depressed about Dad's situation, but then I recall all the spreadsheets, the prearranged arguments, the deception, and the manipulation. When he decided Aaron was the only child worth his time and effort, I lost him years ago, so I know I'm not losing a parent. In times of self-doubt, your messages and remarks enabled me to maintain my position. Walking away from toxic family members, including parents, might be the healthiest course of action. Sometimes the hardest option is the correct one. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you. Inheriting Dad's house, losing Mom's love, how I uncovered her true motive, and built a life beyond the betrayal. When Dad passed away and left me his house, Mom left me. I overheard her telling her husband that she was only doing it to get money from her parents. But she later made an effort to set things right just a few months before my 18th birthday. At the age of 17, my life took an unexpected and excruciating turn. My father died. He experienced a heart attack. He was there with us, vibrant 1 minute, and then he was gone. The speed at which everything changed is still difficult for me to comprehend. No warnings were given. No time to prepare ourselves emotionally or say our goodbyes. The most important person in my life, my dad, was abruptly taken from me. We had a very strong connection. I looked to him for guidance, solace, and amusement. It was like losing a piece of my soul when I lost him. My dad's lawyer brought the family together to make his will public after his funeral, while we were still in the cloud of mourning. Although my dad wasn't particularly affluent, he had worked hard throughout his life and had made wise investments. The lawyer revealed, much to everyone's surprise, that he had essentially left everything to me. He owned the family home, but it was now in my name. I had the deeds to the house, signed by him. I didn't first completely understand the significance of that, especially when I was still grieving his passing. My mother was enraged, while I was still absorbing it. She began screaming as soon as she learned that the house was now legally mine, and she adamantly asked that the lawyer show her the will so she could confirm it. To put things in perspective, my parents' marriage was among the worst in history. My parents were always at odds, and it wasn't like one of them was at fault because they were both flawed. They had first married for love. Or at least that was how they explained it, but any love they had soon vanished as their disagreements widened. Their love gave way to frustration and resentment. My parents were both very focused on their careers. That really made them farther distant from one another, despite your assumption that it would bring them closer together. My dad's achievement was too much for my mom to handle. This was because she lost out on years of her work when she decided to have a child. My dad never made her make this decision, to be clear. My mother has expressed to me on multiple occasions her uncertainty about having children. She ultimately made the decision to become pregnant, nevertheless. Since she didn't want to look back and regret not having children, but she soon discovered how much she detested it. After having me, my mother is a prime illustration of why not every adult should be permitted to have children. She would become upset with me for the tiniest things, like not tying my shoes properly or having trouble with my homework, and I can still clearly remember those times. From the beginning, she treated me like a burden. Even if I couldn't really comprehend it as a child, I could sense her contempt. I would witness other children with their mothers receiving warmth, support, and hugs. She only gave me coldness and criticism. My mother treated me badly because she was frustrated with her own life. I couldn't help but feel like I was in the way. Due to health problems and pregnancy complications, my mom had to take a few years off from her job after giving birth to me. She blamed me for her inability to work, which she detested. My dad was the one providing for the family at this period. He believed that this would be the ideal chance for my mother to connect with me, but it never did. My mother chose to remain emotionally aloof throughout this time, rather than attempting to connect with me. She would frequently tell my dad and I that she wished I had never been born because she wasn't suited to be a mother. As a result, my dad would threaten to divorce her. Throughout a number of arguments with her, my mother would threaten to take me away from him as a form of punishment for him abandoning her, rather than taking her to see a psychiatrist. My mother was obviously unhappy with the way things had gone, both in her marriage and as a mother. My mom frequently left me alone without any concern or attention. By zoning out for hours watching TV at home or going out with her friends. She made no attempt to hire a babysitter. I was left to my own devices most of the time. During her few visits, she made it apparent that she had no interest in taking on the duties of a typical mother. I don't recall her ever preparing a decent meal for me because she detested cooking. Pizza rolls, mac and cheese, and other frozen foods that didn't require work made up the majority of my diet. That was all I knew for a long time, since I was too little to understand any better. I didn't mind at the time, but now I see how neglected I was. It was more than just missing home-cooked meals or a good hug. The most painful part was the emotional abandonment. I immediately discovered that I should never complain to my mother about anything. Every time I attempted to communicate my wants or sentiments, it would backfire. She would reprimand me and act as though I was solely to blame, never accepting responsibility, or making an effort to make things right. I found it easier to suppress my emotions and keep her from getting upset. I was always trying to avoid upsetting her, always trying to blend in, and always walking on eggshells. I was deeply scarred by the reality I had to live with. Unlike my mother, I felt appreciated and seen by my father. He was undoubtedly the best of the two, but I wouldn't say he was the ideal parent. He had his shortcomings too. He really liked hanging out with me. Unlike my mom, he never gave me the impression that he was acting out of duty. It made all the difference because he truly cared about being in my life. As I began to mature, our home underwent a transformation. In the end, my mother returned to work, although she never fully reclaimed the esteemed position she had held before her leave. She detested having to rebuild her career after feeling that she had already paid her dues and had to start over. It wasn't any easier to be the target of her hatred. Even though I could somewhat understand her frustration, losing years of professional advancement, and feeling stuck in her situation, I ended up spending a lot of time alone after my mom started working again. I would get home from school, prepare a basic lunch, and complete my assignments. It became a habit, and to be honest, by then I was accustomed to getting by on my own. I had essentially come to realize that I couldn't count on my mother to provide me with much emotional or physical support. My parents still tried, though. My dad and I would go out to supper together on some evenings. My mother never came, as though she were an outsider in her own family. She maintained a distance from them. My dad and I would discuss everything and everything at those dinners. I would tell him everything about my school life, my friends, or whatever was on my mind, and he would tell me about his job. Occasionally the fascinating projects he was working on or office drama. Everything seemed regular during those few hours. It was one of the few times I didn't feel like an afterthought or a burden, but rather like a daughter enjoying time with her father. I truly treasure those times because they made me feel safe and connected. My mom started a new job that needed her to travel frequently when I turned 14. I believe she saw the high-paying job as an opportunity to finally regain some of the professional success she had lost. She chose to take the job without consulting my dad, which resulted in one of the most heated arguments I've ever seen between them. Although my dad didn't mind her working, she would be gone for days at a time for this job, which meant he would have to care for me by himself. Their voices reverberated throughout the home as I listened to them quarrel late into the night. I was the primary point of disagreement. I detested that. I detested being the cause of so many of their arguments. I went to my dad's study later and assured him that I could take care of myself while he was at work and that he didn't have to worry about me. I reasoned that perhaps my parents' relationship would improve if I could only demonstrate that I wasn't a burden. I recall the expression on his face when I said that. Guilt swept over him, as though he recognized that I had been made to mature more quickly than I should have. He drew me into an embrace. It was one of those times when we both recognized the true dysfunction of the situation without explicitly stating it. My mom started her new job shortly after, and she started to go missing for days at a time. The home was quieter, almost tranquil without her. It wasn't much better when she returned either. When she did speak to me, it was like she was speaking to a complete stranger. Warmth and a sense of belonging were lacking. She would return home fatigued, give me a fleeting glance, and then either go back out with her friends or go into her room. Despite the fact that we were in the same room, she felt very far away. I had learned not to expect much from her by then, but it still hurt. My parents' marriage was essentially non-existent by the time I was 16, as though they were just housemates. They were sleeping in separate bedrooms. If you're wondering why they didn't simply file for divorce and move on, trust me, I asked myself that question often. In actuality, I believe that they both chose not to get a divorce because it was simpler to continue living in this unhealthy, distant relationship than to deal with the financial and legal complexities of separation, when it comes to alimony, legal bills, and arguing over child custody. Things that neither of them seemed to want to deal with. Divorces may be extremely expensive. My schooling was the only significant investment that my parents truly shared. Despite the fact that they both made good money, they hardly spent any money on me other than that. Other than the home expenditures. They didn't have much money to divide because my dad owned the house. They didn't have to quarrel over little matters. They lived under the same roof but had largely independent lives, each with their own food and car. For my part, I would receive money from my dad each week, which would be plenty to pay for groceries and school lunches. I didn't really anticipate much more. And while it wasn't much, it was sufficient for me to handle. I had gotten used to being in the background while they were preoccupied with their own problems and grievances. As I approached my 17th birthday, I made the decision to celebrate my birthday in a way that was authentic for once. My birthday had always been somewhat of a non-event until that point. Unless I reminded him, my dad, bless him, had a tendency to forget my birthday. He would try his best to get me a cake once I did, and we would either have a low-key dinner or celebrate in private at home. However, it was never more than the two of us. I wanted something bigger this time. I wanted to have a true party and invite my friends over. To my surprise, my father concurred. He helped me organize it and thought it was a terrific idea. Naturally, my mother declined to go. She simply stated that she didn't want to be part, without even bothering to offer an explanation. I honestly didn't give a damn. I had been emotionally and physically accustomed to her absence by that time, so I wasn't bothered by the idea that she wouldn't be present. I finally received what I wanted for the first time in my life, a birthday celebration filled with joy, laughing, and friends. It was ideal for me, but it wasn't ostentatious. For a second, I was truly joyful. I had finally come to terms with the fact that my life was what it was, flaws and all. However, that fleeting moment of happiness was quickly eclipsed by tragedy. As if the universe couldn't bear to see me pleased, it seemed unreal when my dad died. My mother still detested me, and here I was, only 17, inheriting the home we shared. She made it obvious how much she detested me, since she couldn't accept that my dad had given me the house. After the will reading was finished, she yelled at me for hours, claiming that I had manipulated my dad throughout the years and that she was the true owner. Then she modified her strategy. She began attempting to persuade me to put her name on the house's deed. Fortunately, my dad's parents, my grandparents, defended me. They ensured that I couldn't be influenced by my mother, since she was never a decent wife to my dad when he was living. They made it apparent to her that she didn't deserve his house simply because he was dead. If she attempted to compel me to alter the deed, they even threatened to take her to court. My mother became enraged and threatened to leave me. She claimed that because I was self-centered enough to refuse her the house, she intended to prove to me that I couldn't live without her. She seemed to be trying to convince me that I couldn't support myself, as if losing her would also make me realize how much I depended on her. My paternal grandparents refused to give up. They promised to take care of me in the event that my mother left. In contrast to her, they promised to support me through anything, not only until I was 18, but for the rest of my life. My mom followed through on her threat and left within 2 or 3 weeks after my dad's death. My dad had loved and collected comic books for years, but my mom threw out his whole collection before she left the house. It was her last act of retaliation. It is obvious that she did it out of spite, in some perverse manner, to harm me, to destroy him, and to hold me accountable for any resentment she may have had inside. When I was nothing, she said I would come crawling back to her in a few years. At a time when I was already feeling totally lost, her words were poisonous and intended to tear me apart even more. She left me as though I had no significance to her. It was hard for me to comprehend that she could leave so simply, so soon after my father's passing. I felt as though I had lost both of my parents in a matter of weeks, and the burden was unbearable. As promised, my paternal grandparents moved in with me. They made every effort to give me support and stability during this period. My grandparents were calm, loving people who understood how much I was in pain. They set aside their own suffering to support me, despite the fact that they were also hurting. I was simply trying to get by day. In the meantime, my mom's desertion made me feel even more alone, and I was already grieving over the loss of my father. I was unable to completely comprehend what was going on around me. As if I were living in a fog. I made myself get out of bed, get dressed, and go to school every day. I knew I needed to complete my education in order to be someone in my life. Even though I wanted to shut down entirely, when I was still in high school, I couldn't get my mother's words out of my head. Without her, I would be nothing. I vowed to myself that I would work hard and make sure I succeeded for the rest of my life. My maternal grandparents also made it a point to see me often during this very trying period in my life. They were in disbelief that their daughter had left me after my dad's death, and were just as astonished and horrified by my mom's behavior as I was. They actually bore a great deal of responsibility for it. I've put a lot of effort into creating a life for myself over the last 5 years. I persevered through it all. Graduating from college last year with honors, cum laude, and landing a fantastic career in information technology. Being able to work remotely has made the position an incredible opportunity. Given everything I've been through, this flexibility has allowed me to travel the world while still working, which feels like a dream come true. I never imagined that I would be here, leading a life that seemed so full of possibilities, but I managed to get through those difficult times somehow. The house my dad left me has been a blessing in more ways than I can list, and I still reside there. I was able to save a substantial sum of money that I would have otherwise spent on rent, in addition to having stability during my time in college. I was able to graduate from college debt-free, thanks to the money my father gave me and some assistance from my paternal grandparents. Since starting my career, I'd been gradually making the house more uniquely mine by remodeling each room. Every improvement I make to the house makes me feel as if I'm taking back and personalizing the space that has so many memories, both happy and sad. Even though they have now returned to their own house, my paternal grandparents still frequently visit me. We still have a close relationship, and I try to see them as much as I can. They were there for me when I needed them most, and for that, I will always be thankful. In all these years, my mother had never once gotten in touch with me. I did get tidbits of information from cousins on her side of the family, and based on what I've heard, she has never felt bad about leaving me. Additionally, rumors told me that she remarried and is currently leading an opulent life with her new spouse. She finally got what she had always desired, I guess, a life without obligations and according to her own rules. My mother unexpectedly contacted me last week for the first time in 5 years. She began by sending an email. She most likely obtained my email address from someone else or from my LinkedIn profile. She mentioned in the email that she had missed connecting with me over the years and that she wanted to communicate. I felt nothing when I read her name in my email. No sadness, no desire, no rage. I definitely would have been desperate for her attention, clamoring for her approval and seizing the opportunity to get back in touch if this had occurred 5 years prior. I would have done anything to win her love back then. Now, though, it was like reading a stranger's email. I was not moved by anything she said. I decided not to respond since, if nothing else, I was annoyed by her message. Then she started phoning me all the time. She may have gotten my number from one of my cousins, but I'm not sure how. I received multiple voicemails from her. She expressed in each one how much she would want to meet and get back in touch. I disregarded each and every one. I didn't need her to pull me back to that dark place after years of mending and moving on my own. Then she texted me for a long time last week. This one was unique. She expressed her sincere guilt for what she had done, and her want to simply meet and offer her apology. She said she wanted to make amends with me after giving it some serious thought over the last few years. If I claimed that after reading that message I wasn't a little intrigued, I would be lying. She had never taken responsibility for her actions before, but now she appeared to be doing so for the first time. I wondered what had led to this abrupt change of heart. But I wasn't prepared to forgive her. Was she truly sorry? Was she serious, or was this just another self-serving ruse to make herself feel less guilty? I answered when she called again. I wanted to know what she truly wanted because her insistence was beginning to irritate me. After responding, I asked her directly what she wanted from me. I instructed my mother to talk rapidly and made it plain that I would block her and finish the conversation within the next 5 minutes if she didn't have anything important to say. She frantically begged me not to interrupt her right away. She said, "I miss you, and now that I'm older, I hate myself for everything I did. Her voice trembled. She repeatedly apologized, telling me that she had finally come to the realization of the seriousness of her actions, and I could hear the desperation in her voice. She continued by saying that while it was clear that she understood if I didn't want a relationship with her, her true desire was simply to meet with me. I wanted to explain why I did what I did all those years ago, she stated, as though there was some rationale for leaving me out of the question. I couldn't resist laughing. She had given me enough justifications to last a lifetime. I informed her that I didn't need any closure from her because I had already come to terms with the situation as it was. I didn't care. So I didn't need to know why she did it. However, she insisted that I at least join her for supper. She assured me that she would never disturb me again if I didn't agree with her, and that I could block her or go. She was so desperate it was almost disturbing. I wasn't comfortable with it. There was a strange feeling. Why now? Why was she now so keen to make amends after being silent for 5 years? Now the same woman who had cursed me and said I would be nothing had reappeared, pleading for one opportunity to give an explanation. I couldn't get rid of the thought that this abrupt change of heart was about something else. Everything looked too premeditated, too abrupt. As though she had a secret agenda. I smelled something fishy, but I couldn't identify it. I chose to comply, even though it was against my better judgment. I simply wanted to find out the true purpose of this. I reluctantly consented to join her and her new spouse for supper. The meal was held at my mother's new home, and I could tell right once that she was leading a very different life. The home was extremely opulent, with pricey artwork, sumptuous furniture, and sophisticated accents all over. Bill, her new spouse, appeared sufficiently amiable and kind. We engaged in small talk after his kind introduction, but the entire situation felt uneasy, as if there were enormous unsaid tensions between us. As I walked past the bedrooms during dinner to use the restroom, I couldn't help but notice them. They seemed like they were from a luxury catalog because of how exquisitely designed they were. The pictures that lined the walls attracted my attention even more, images of my mother and Bill grinning together while visiting far-flung places across the globe. They appeared content and relaxed. I was saddened to see that she never acted that way toward my dad and me. Her smile with us was unlike anything I had ever seen. I was taken aback by the contrast, which evoked emotions I had previously suppressed. I heard Bill and my mother conversing in low tones as I was making my way back from the restroom. Since they hadn't noticed me approaching, I stopped and tried to listen to what they had to say out of curiosity. My mother was telling Bill how much she detested seeing me and how much I reminded her of my father. At that point, I felt sick to my stomach. Despite Bill's attempts to comfort her, she persisted in moaning that she wished she could skip the entire supper. I took out my phone on a whim and began to record. I have no idea why, although it might have been a reflex, as if I needed evidence of her true self. Perhaps I hoped to see it later so I could completely comprehend what was going on. In any case, I made a record. I overheard my mother tell Bill that she would never have gotten in touch with me if it weren't for her folks' insistence that she get back in touch. She continued by saying that she detested her parents for pressuring her to take this action and that, as a result of their circumstances, she was merely going through the motions to ensure her inheritance from them. Everything made sense when she said those words and explained that this dinner and the entire act were really a means to an end for her. Now everything made clear. My mother hadn't become morally upright overnight. She hadn't given it much thought, and she most definitely didn't feel bad about leaving me all alone. My intuition had been correct. For a minute, I stood motionless, my heart pounding. Her statement that she didn't want to be doing this, and that she detested being around me struck a deeper chord than I had anticipated. Even though I had a sneaking suspicion something wasn't right, she remained the same self-centered individual who only thought about herself after all these years and everything. After turning off the recorder, I left. She fell silent as soon as she spotted me. I silently thanked Bill for supper and made my way out the door, ignoring my mother's persistent calls, wondering why I was going so suddenly. She later messaged me to say that I had embarrassed her in front of her husband and that I should just be more honest with her because she is my mother. After all, I haven't texted her back because I'm so mad at her after hearing my mother talk about it. Is it wrong to have left the table in the middle of dinner? First update. I want to make it clear that I have always accepted my mother for who she is, which is why I didn't go straight to her in her home after hearing what I did. To be honest, I wasn't overly surprised by it. I was correct to suspect that she had a hidden agenda from the beginning. In fact, I'm happy I got to meet her and have that tape. Tomorrow, I'm going to confront my maternal grandparents about it and find out the truth. Second update. I told my maternal grandparents everything when we met. They initially expressed a happy surprise at my mother's desire to get back in touch with me. However, their faces immediately changed when I played the tape of her telling Bill that the inheritance was her only motivation. While my grandmother apologized to me, my grandfather appeared enraged. She admitted that they had been talking about their inheritance lately, and that 2 months prior, they had told my mother that they were too disappointed in her for leaving me. Therefore, they didn't want to leave her anything. Rather, their older children would receive the bequest. After my mother pleaded with them to change their minds, my grandfather informed her that she may be named in the will if she got back in touch with me. She had chosen to contact me out of desperation. My grandfather apologized awkwardly and said he felt it was a wonderful idea at the time, but I shook my head. After all these years, he told me he thought my mother had finally grown up. But he was obviously wrong. I told him not to put the blame on himself, but that my mother is merely self-centered and that he and my grandma should have known better. Fortunately, I saw her right away and wasn't duped. Rather than giving my mother her portion of the fortune, my grandfather vowed to give it to me instead. Third update. Not even a day after I spoke with my maternal grandparents, my mother called and yelled at me. I knew this was my opportunity to exact revenge on her and let everything out. So, I hadn't intentionally blocked her. She said I should have spoken to her first, and screamed at me for letting her see her parents. She threatened to destroy my life and said I had no right to confront Grandpa. Her remarks made me chuckle uncontrollably, and I forcefully informed her that I was no longer the child she had mistreated and left behind all those years prior. I inquired as to if her husband was fully aware of the type of woman she was or if I ought to give him a list of all the things she had done to me over the years. At that, she became quiet. I assured her that I would not think twice about publicly exposing her to all of our relatives and cousins if needed, and that I still had the video from the dinner where she admitted her true motivation. She changed her mind and insisted that because she gave birth to me, I should at least respect her as a parent and not threaten her. After months of pain, I sneered and told her that she had chosen to endure that, and that she couldn't continue to blame me for it after all these years. I said she had to leave my life as soon as possible because I was tired of her machinations. If not, I wouldn't think twice about ruining her life by telling everyone the truth. Since then, I have blocked her, and I doubt she would ever attempt to get in touch with me again. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.